So this session is about SOAP. SOAP is the full form of SOAP is Service Object Access Protocol, and this is used for the communication between two different applications built on two different technologies. So SOAP is also like any other application layer protocol. HTTP is one among those protocols in the application layer of TCP/IP, right? So HTTP protocol is used for the communication between a web application and a web client. Means if a human being, if you want to communicate with a web applications, if you want to send the request to a web application and receive the response from a web server, you need to use HTTP protocol. In the same way, if an application wants to communicate with another application, then the protocol requires to be used is SOAP. So how this SOAP is used? So how this communication between two different technologies or two different applications can happen? So let's go through those details now. So the communication between two different applications is happened through web services. So a service which is published on the web to be accessible for any other web applications is called as web service, and any other application who is consuming that service are called as its clients, right? How these come now, in order to make this communication between those two, the client and the service provider, there needs to be a protocol like this. The communication, the data propagation between the client and server, the service provider, happens through the SOAP protocol, that is Service Object Access Protocol, and this protocol contains or transmits the data between the client and server, should transmit the data between the client and server in a universal language, because those two applications, the client and server, are two different applications, and they can be built on two different technologies. So each language has its own syntax, each technology has its own syntaxes and semantics. So that's why, so the protocol which is used for the communication between those applications should be universal and should be, any application can easily understand that. So the common or universal language that we have is XML. So XML markup language, right? XML, right? So this application, so that means SOAP, the protocol which is used between the communication of two applications is SOAP, and that SOAP uses XML internally for the communication, for the data communication between two applications. So every SOAP packet contains, as we all know, the data and TCP/IP, the data communication TCP/IP happens in the data packets. In the same way, SOAP also communicates the data in the form of packets. So the packet of information is a SOAP packet contains header and a body. Okay, so and that too in the XML form. So that is all about SOAP. Now let's see more details about a web service. Besides SOAP, what else we need to have the communication between a service and service provider and a client? So that the another important aspect in the web service is WSDL, which is the short form of WSDL, which is the short form of Web Service Description Language. Web Service Description Language. In short, it is called as WSDL or WSDL. So a WSDL is a contract between the server and its clients, a service provider and its clients. A service provider, as I said earlier, is an application who provides its services accessible in a web to all its clients. That means, for example, Make My Trip is a web application that uses that is used by the end users to retrieve the information from various flights. Alright, information for about various flight operating flight operators like Indigo, Kingfisher, Jet Airways, like that. So different air operators have their own websites to you know to sell their tickets, sell their air tickets. But all these air tickets you can also find in Make My Trip, right? So what will happen in the behind the scenes? Make My Trip will consume the services from each of those web applications of those air operators. Say for example, um, Jet Airways has its own web application and it is also be available through Make My Trip. So that means that Jet Airways has to publish its service available to Make My Trip. In the same way, so here Jet Airways is the service provider and Make My Trip is the client. In the same ways, like Make My Trip, some other operator also, some other third party system can use the services provided by Jet Airways and they can use those services. Right? Similarly, we see the Sensex details, marketing, the trading details can be shown by different websites. So how are they showing actually the same information? How are they showing? So the information the information related to the stock market, that information will be published through a web service by one core application and remaining all of those websites acting as clients and consume that service and showing their websites. So this is a simple example for a web service. Now, in taking another step ahead in this concept, so how the service provider can publish the services, that's a different topic, but what the client should know about the service and what the how actually the client should send the request to the server and how the server respond to that request. So this is all together is called as a contract between the client and server. This contract is nothing is drafted in the form of a WSDL, WSDL. So a WSDL is a contract between the client and the service provider about the service that has been published on the web. So what is that contract? So that contract should tell the information about what service has been published by the service provider and what that service, what methods that service is having, and what is the request that service expects, and what is the response that that service will be publishing or will be providing when that service is invoked. So this all information should be known by all both the parties, the clients and the service provider. So then only they can comply on that request on that particular contract and can have a seamless communication or integration. Right, now let's see what is that WSDL format looks like. I'm going to show now a sample WSDL file to explain this concept. So all the again the WSDL is also should be in an universal language. That means it also should be working. It should also be drafted in the form of XML. Okay. So here is what we have. So WSDL format looks like this. So it contains mainly the service. So this is the service. IC transaction service is the service, and it contains the binding information, and this is the name of the service. With this service, in this service, what methods are defined will be found. So this IC transaction service has been binded to a service called IC transaction service. When I search for that, I can find what operations how are there in this service. So IC transaction service contains an operation called submit. Submit is the operation that we will be performing when we invoke this IC transaction service. And what does it take? It takes an input and it gives an output. So what is this input? So this input is the one. Submit request is the name of the is the one actually that will be that the customer has to provide. So any consumers of this web service has to submit this input. So this is now the definition of submit request contains an element called IC connect request. So the detailed definition of this interconnect. So this is a complex type. This request is a complex element. That's why it is given like this element. So it is defined with an element IC colon interconnect request. This definition, the definition of this IC colon interconnect request will be defined in an XSD file. So we are not going to worry about that XSDs and the element definitions right now. But in short, what I want to show here is a WSDL contains three important things: the service name and the operation name, and each operation contains the request, what is the request and what is the response. So these are the things that we are interested to know about a WSDL. So this WSDL contains the contract. How does it define the contract? So this is defining the contract that the service provider is going to publish a service called IC transaction service, which has an operation called submit, and which has an operation called submit, which has an operation called submit, and this submit operation takes an input called submit request and it delivers the output called submit response. What is the full form of this submit request and submit response? It is not defined here. They have been defined in separate XSD files. So, but we are not going to drill into those details. For now, that is all about a SOAP and a WSDL and web services. Now, let's get back to the details of how can we test web services, how a tester can test a web service. So in the next session, we are going to see what is SOAP UI and how is it used for testing web services.